Three words: grab and hold. But in visual communication, they are important. If your aesthetic, whether as a piece of design or an illustration, visually appeals to someone, how do you know that person will engage further and deeper with it? The aesthetic choices we make attract attention, but effective visual communication does just that, communicates. So how can we use semiotics to hold attention? Welcome to Semiosis 101 Season 2's 9th semiotic video. If you've watched Semiosis 101 videos before, then you already know I am Dave Wood. Season 2's semiotic theme is a semiotic Rosetta Stone, which is a metaphor to the unlocking and designer-centric translation of Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotic theory of semiosis, sign action. Why do you need Semiosis 101? Peirce's writing and terminology is very obtuse. In the next 3 episodes, I will be focusing on the visual language, the aesthetic I suppose, and how semiosis can enrich this in maximising its power to visually communicate. In this video, we will look to answer the question, what difference does encoding semiotic signs make? To do this, we explore a bit more pragmatism through another review of 2 useful books. Hit subscribe and I will explain. The aesthetic is alluring. It is the subjective visualness in visual communication. Some may disparagingly call this the decoration or the prettiness or the gloss, etc. Some creators may think the aesthetic is their design, their art. Some may think of the aesthetic as the visual language used, the technical ability, the beauty, etc. Let us sidestep any subjective arguments about worthiness or taste and focus on one main aspect of its power: to attract. Forget accolades, awards, prizes, collectors, etc. and let us approach the aesthetic semiotically. Let us approach the aesthetic pragmatically. Let us explore aesthetics as a tool or step within semiotic communication. In this episode, I will review another 2 books I have found useful to demonstrate the difference that the aesthetic can make once it is semiotically charged. The 2 books I will discuss with you are Pragmatic Aesthetics by Richard Schusterman and one of Floyd Merrill's books on Peircean Semiotics, Semiosis in the Postmodern Age. Merrill is on the biosemiosis side of semiotics within nature, but he is excellent at explaining Peirce's sign action process. For the creative reader, once again the book's index will be your research friend. Schusterman's book stands the classical understanding of aesthetics on its head by reframing aesthetics pragmatically as experience. It is in this reframing as experience that, like many of the books I will share, and essentially the whole of Semiosis 101's philosophical framework, places you all within a phenomenological point of view in which your understanding emerges. Remember, Peirce's phenomenological sign action impacts on an interpreter, meaning emerges. In visual communication design, the aesthetic encodes that meaning. The main thrust of Schusterman's pragmatist aesthetic is that he argues that the value and function of aesthetics does not lie as a specialised means end. Aesthetics is not a mere destination in itself. It is more than an end point of awe from the viewer. Aesthetics is not passive admiration of the creative's genius, its beauty to be merely observed and framed in a classical sense. Schusterman says that aesthetics enhances, invigorates and vitalises our immediate environment and is at once instrumentally valuable and satisfying in itself. By taking a philosophically pragmatic view of the application of aesthetics, it becomes an aid to our achievement of whatever visual communication ends we pursue. Aesthetics becomes a proactive application rather than a passive element. Aesthetics helps to attract attention. Effective semiotics helps to retain it. Schusterman's work opens up a new perception on the power of the aesthetic. Within a pragmatic philosophical framing of aesthetics, it becomes an aesthetic experience in the viewer, the audience. This is where this book is influential to creators who wish to improve the effectiveness of their visual communication. Schusterman's pragmatically reframes aesthetics as experiential, as a proactive application to aid a communicational outcome. This aesthetic experience takes the aesthetic beyond a classical state of being an end to be admired. By reframing aesthetics as a state of having an experience, the audience is pulled in by the aesthetic choices of the creative to a phenomenological experience in which their attention is peaked toward a desired communicational outcome. You can see now how Peirce's semiosis can strengthen the aesthetic experience. Schusterman's book helps creators trying to understand how and why the semiotic crafting of the aesthetic through the visual language choices is crucial. The book shares with Peirce's semiosis the philosophical framework of pragmatism. It can be said that pragmatists reject a reality that is independent of the mind. It is in the act of interpretation that personal reality is constructed, embedded in our physical and material worlds. Meaning from the aesthetic is therefore interpreted from the social, cultural, lived experiences of the audience. This changes the dynamic of the power of the aesthetic from the creative to how the audience will interpret what they see. It is in that power shift that Peirce's sign action semiosis can effectively strengthen the aesthetic's reception by the audience. I've really found Merrill's books on Peirce's semiosis very useful in helping me understand the theory. Merrill is an academic with an interest in biosemiotics, a branch of semiotic theory integrating biology and semiotics. So any creative who reads Merrill does so in a comparative way. Obviously, creators must not expect to be spoon-fed. Within a comparative reading, Merrill is very useful in writing with clarity on Peirce's theory. A reader must therefore expect to apply this application of Peirce from one discipline, nature, to another, visual communication design. Once again, the index at the back of Merrill's books on Peirce will be your greatest ally. In Semiosis in the Postmodern Age, Merrill's overall theme is on Peirce's takedown of binary modernist thought. As we know, Peirce's theory is predicated on a triad. Initially, I came to Merrill's books to gain insights on how to understand Peirce's triadic categories. I discovered his books by chance with a literature search. I was fortunate to buy all of his books on Peirce and cited them in my PhD, as I found I could understand Peirce through how Merrill framed the three categories of firstness, secondness, thirdness. What was really a surprise was through a biosemiotic focus, the idea that within these phenomenological states, it was clear that semiotic signs were participatory, meaning is extracted through interacting with the sign action rather than as a spectator to it. By interacting, the sign action changes both the interpreter and the semiotic sign. This parallels to what Schusterman writes about how the aesthetic is an aid to achievement rather than the end outcome. What I mean by that is, with the semiotic act of interpretation, the audience discovers something from the sign action, which a moment before they were not aware of. Professor Frascara would call this a communicational situation in which a moment of behavioural change has been made. Now, we have discussed this in previous videos. One audience member may perceive just iconic shapes. Another audience member perceives these shapes coalescing into a panda. A third audience member will perceive the logo for the WWF. It remains the same image, but through different levels of phenomenological perception, firstness, secondness, and thirdness, different levels of meaning is extracted from the piece of visual communication. In pairing Merrill and Schusterman's books, we see examples of how reframing what we see into a framework of experiential perceptions puts the audience forward rather than the creative. A pragmatic aesthetic framing brings the audience's role as a participant in the aesthetic rather than a passive viewer. The aesthetic hooks the audience's attention, but the crafting of effective sign action by the creative retains their attention. In extending the subconscious moments of perception, sign action has an increased opportunity to connect with the intended audience. But as we see from Merrill, perception and the semiotic sign can change by the act of the sign action. The audience discovers something that a moment before they had not thought, and the semiotic sign has the power to begin to communicate at higher perception levels. Pragmatically, meaning is emergent depending upon the perception of the interpreter. To end this 9th season 2 video, we can conclude that Peirce's sign action is really powerful. It is participatory, involving the perception and experiential references of the audience for the sign action to begin working. Remember, Peirce first says that for a semiotic sign to work, it first must be perceived as a sign for something. In visual communication design, the aesthetic is the visual language within which the iconic, indexical and symbolic triad can work. Iconic representation between the interaction of lines, shapes, marks, colours, etc. is nested within the higher levels of representation of a concept. Like the panda example, some people may only perceive shapes, some a panda and others a charitable organisation. Come back next week as the next Semiosis 101 episode will help you understand how to begin encoding semiotic signs within the aesthetic. I am Dave Wood, a design educator and researcher, a published design author, and I've worked commercially as both a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. The guy behind the theory, Charles Sanders Peirce, was a philosopher, a mathematician and a theorist, but he was not a creative. Each week on this Scout Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, I will post at least one 10-minute explainer video on an aspect of Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory. Each video will feature a take-home piece of applicable semiotic theory, and they do interconnect to build up your understanding of semiosis. Each free Semiosis 101 10-minute video will use design aesthetic terms instead of theoretical language. As a fellow creative and a published design author, I have a link in the description to my Scout Scott website. If you're interested in reading my Semiotic Rosetta Stone academic writing, then you can visit my academia.edu link in the description. Any other books on Peircean semiotics or design I have mentioned in the videos are also listed in the description. Check them out too. On the Semiosis 101 Substack semiotic resource, I have support materials for both free and paid subscribers. There are full annotated reading lists, video transcripts, 5-minute reads, plus other goodies and exclusive Semiosis 101 merchandise. The Substack link is in the description. Thanks for watching. Check out the other Semiosis 101 videos, like and share them with your friends, and hit the bell and subscribe buttons to be notified when next week's free Semiosis 101 video is published. You can also follow Semiosis 101 on the socials for updates. It is Semiosis 101 on Instagram and Twitter. See you all again next week for more Semiosis 101 to help illustrators and designers to enhance your visual communication skills.